The clerk said my name like it was a case number, not a life. A stamp hit the paper, a door closed, and the file landed on the counter with a dry slap that sounded too much like a verdict. I watched my child sign the complaint with a steady hand I had taught to hold a pencil. Fraud, misappropriation, emotional cruelty. Each word slid like a blade under my skin. When the pen left the page, my child did not look back at me. That was the first mercy of the day. I did not shout. I did not plead. I let the fluorescent glare of the courthouse settle over me the way dust settles over old photographs. Strangers stared because families do not usually break in public. The hallway smelled like coffee gone bitter and paper warmed by hands that never stopped sorting other people's disasters. My own hands were calm. They have been calm through hunger, grief, and the slow grind of years that take more than they give. Calm is what people mistake for weakness until it is too late. There had been warnings. The first was small, almost polite. My child started using my name. Not dad. Not mom. A name. Then the name followed by requests that were not requests. I told myself it was a phase, a posture copied from friends who wore pride like new shoes. I told myself grown children need distance. That distance is not always a cutting. I told myself many things because I wanted to believe I had not raised a stranger. Money made the gap wider. It always does. I built what I had brick by brick, night by night, years stacked on years, the way people who cannot afford to fail must build. I worked in places where the lights flicker and the floor never stops humming. I learned how to stretch a week across 2 paychecks and still show up with a pressed shirt. I did not learn how to defend myself from my own blood. When my child's messages turned sharp, I switched to calls. When calls went unanswered, I switched to voice notes. When voice notes turned into transcripts for lawyers, I stopped. Silence is not surrender. It is a shield that makes impatient enemies show their plan. The complaint arrived at my door before the court date did. A courier with tired eyes handed it over like a pizza. I set the envelope on the kitchen table where I had once lined up spelling sheets, report cards, and clay figures with crooked smiles. I opened it with the same careful motion I used to open a letter from a doctor. Inside was a story told by someone who knew my house very well and loved it very little. Missing funds, coerced signatures, a slap that never happened except in the kind of stories where a parent needs to look monstrous. There were dates I knew by heart because on one of those nights I had been alone in an emergency room, holding my breath while a monitor counted the space between beats. There were numbers that looked true because they stood straight. Numbers can wear suits and lie. I did not sleep that night. I brewed tea that tasted like twigs and read the complaint again. I let anger pass through me like a wave. Anger like that wants to live inside the throat. It wants to burst out and make a mess. I did not let it. I took it apart the way a watchmaker takes apart a stubborn mechanism. Gear by gear. Word by word. Where did this idea come from? Who whispered it? Who stood to gain if I broke? The answer walked into court with my child. A lawyer with a smile that never warmed. I knew that smile. I had worn it years ago when I had to talk to creditors who wanted me to bow. That smile says, I have done this enough times to forget it matters. That smile loves stairs that go only up. My child stood straighter beside it than I had seen in a long time. Pride can hold a spine like a brace. Pride can also cut off air. The judge asked for names. I said mine. My child said mine. The courtroom quieted as if it wanted to listen to the echo and decide who deserved the sound. The clerk read the claim again, and the words that had sliced me at the kitchen table now floated like paper boats on a controlled river. Fraud, misuse, neglect. I kept my breathing. Slow. Precision wins wars, not volume. The lawyer spoke about sacrifice, but not mine. About dreams deferred, but not mine. About a childhood shaped by scarcity that a careful parent had turned into a life of safety, then hoarded like treasure. The story was elegant. It made me look like a dragon at the mouth of a cave. The problem with elegant stories is that they forget how rooms smell. They forget the burn of soap on cracked hands. They forget that school lunches cost less if you arrive early, but they still cost. They forget that there is a difference between greed and survival. I watched my child avoid my eyes while swearing to tell the truth. The oath dripped off a tongue I had cleaned with salt and water when a fever left sores. Memory is stubborn. It cannot be cross-examined out of a body that lived it. I let memory sit with me like an old friend who does not speak. The judge asked the lawyer to proceed. My child's voice did not shake. Mine would have once. There had been a night many months before the lawsuit when the air in our house turned heavy. My child stood in the doorway with a list. Where the money went. Who signed what? Who owned which walls? The questions were not questions. They were traps set along a path I had already walked in the dark. I answered with patience because rage ruins proofs. My child called me by my name and said I owed a debt for years of lost youth. I said I owed nothing, but I would give anything. There is a difference. The next day, I found a second toothbrush gone and a gap in the spice rack where the cumin used to sit. Small thefts tell a larger story. They say, I plan to leave, but I will take the flavors first. I hired a lawyer who did not speak like a hero. We met in a small office with a humming fan and a plant that had lost faith in windows. I told the story straight. Where I had failed. Where I had tried. Where I had hidden a deed not to keep a fortune from my child, but to keep a roof from a bank that once sent letters with red ink. My lawyer listened, wrote almost nothing, and asked for the one thing that mattered. Proof that I had built my life with my own hands before my child knew how to hold a spoon. Proof is a quiet friend. It does not shout. It waits. In court, I said very little. The lawyer on the other side said plenty. My child's pain was folded into paragraphs that fit neatly into codes. The crowd leaned toward the person who wept. Tears have more gravity than documents. I understood that. I let the room tilt. I let sympathy settle where it wanted. I have learned to step aside when a river runs high. What I did not do was rush to rescue or beg for a pause. I did not hand over the letter I keep in a private folder, written by someone who loved me when I had nothing but a promise. I did not raise the trust papers that bear a date my child never noticed. I did not call the neighbor who saw that I fed 3 houses from one pot during the year everyone lost work. I did not bring all of that because timing is not a luxury. It is a weapon, and I have lived long enough to sharpen it. When the hearing ended for the day, my child walked past me, close enough for the old scent of our home to rise for a moment on clothing that no longer lived there. I wanted to touch a sleeve and say a name I had not said since the last birthday I planned without cake, because there had been a power cut, and we ate fruit in the dark. Instead, I stepped back and said nothing. I watched the lawyer whisper in my child's ear, and I recognized the look that crossed that face. It was the same look I had worn when I believed that winning meant not needing anyone ever again. I went home by the long route. I wanted time to sort my thoughts into boxes I could carry into the next day without spilling them. On a wall, someone had painted a message about love that the rain had half erased. The letters that remained were enough. I stood there longer than I should have and thought about how a house can be full of framed faces and still feel hollow if a single voice decides to turn into an echo. I thought about the first time my child called me by my name. I thought about the pen signing a complaint that will live in a file even when this storm passes. That was the day I realized he was not after forgiveness. He was after everything I owned. I put the kettle on when I reached home, out of habit. I watched the steam climb and fade. I took out a thin folder from the drawer where I keep the few papers I trust more than memory. I laid the folder on the table and did not open it. Some moves do not happen on the board. They happen in the air of a room that has learned to hold its breath. I used to measure time by small victories. The light that stayed on because I paid the bill before the grace period ended. The stitched cuff that held through another shift. The lunchbox that came home empty because the food tasted like care, even when it was plain. After the funeral, the house felt like a stage where the other chair would never be filled again. I learned to move as one instead of two. I learned how to speak in a steady tone so a child would not hear the wobble and think the ground itself could tilt. I looked for work that would not punish me for leaving early when fevers rose. I stopped buying new shoes for myself and learned to bless the ones that lasted through the rain. Grief taught me discipline. Love taught me endurance. I built the house the slow way. No windfalls. No miracles. I saved thin slices from each month and pressed them between pages the way people press flowers. The wallpaper was secondhand. The tiles were discounted because the color ran in uneven veins that most people called a flaw. I called them truthful. I painted the doors late at night when the neighbors slept because I did not want anyone to see me on a ladder with a brush and name it desperation. I told myself the door would dry before morning, that the child would wake to a home that looked finished even when it was not. Raising a child alone is a set of long rows you plant and weed, not for applause, but for harvest. I learned school forms as if they were a second language. I learned which teacher smiled with eyes and which teacher smiled with teeth. I learned how to say yes to field trips and no to fads without making the child feel less. I kept a jar for coins. I kept another jar for the days when coins would not be enough. There were years when that second jar was the one that saved us. My child was quick, not just with books, but with people. The kind of quick that notices what others want to hear and gives it to them in the right shape. Teachers said gifted. Neighbors said blessed. I said careful. I had spent enough time in rooms full of promises to know that being quick can turn to being hungry, and hunger, if not trained, can start to want what belongs to other people. I tried to teach gratitude as a habit, not a speech. Thank the bus driver. Thank the woman who sells you fruit. Thank the person who fixes your shoes. Thank the day for being survivable. We marked birthdays with handmade things. A kite that did not fly high but still pulled at the string like it had ideas. A book of blank pages where I wrote a line on the first page. Fill this with what you wish the world understood. My child drew stars and dragons, and a house with a fence too tall for our block. Later, the drawings grew into lists. Then the lists changed into demands. I told myself that this change was just ambition stretching its legs, that it would settle if I kept the soil rich. When the child started speaking about the future, the words had more edges than hope. Not I will build, but I will own. Not I will work, but I will take my share. I heard my child speak to friends with the bright voice of someone already tasting what had not been cooked. I heard laughter when they talked about people who saved receipts. People like me. I understood that saving does not look clever to those who have never known the price of a misstep. The house grew into itself at the same pace my child grew into a stance. Shoulders back, eyes level, the line of the mouth steady in a way that said this person did not plan to ask twice. The first time my child came home and placed a glossy brochure on the table, I felt something shift. Apartments with glass balconies and views of water that did not belong to us. Cars with seats that remembered your shape. Watches that cost more than a month of our food. I saw the sales pitch woven through the pictures. You deserve this. I wanted to tear the brochure in half, but I did not want to make desire look forbidden and therefore sweeter. I folded it and put it with the stack of papers that I keep because they remind me how easily a person can spend their whole life chasing a photograph. After the spouse died, I had taken our savings and split them like seeds. Some into repairs we could not delay. Some into fees that make official people take you seriously. Some into a small piece of land with bad soil but a good location. I signed a deed late one winter night with hands that smelled like disinfectant and onions. I told no one. Secrets can be kindness if they are built to protect rather than to cheat. The deed went into a folder that went into a drawer that went into a habit. Check that the drawer still locks. I learned about wills the way a person learns about storms, by watching what they do to other people's roofs. Neighbors lost houses because a signature was missing or a date was wrong. Cousins stopped speaking because one aunt whispered faster than another. I could not afford that kind of lesson in my own rooms. I wrote a simple letter, not to reward or punish, but to make sure that the work I had done would not be undone by a single hungry afternoon. I kept the letter folded around the deed like a hand around a pulse. I told myself that I would show it to my child when pride matured into respect. Pride did not do that. Pride matured into appetite. The entitlement did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like humidity, settling into every conversation. A pointed question about why my name sat alone on documents. A remark about how other parents invest directly in their children, not in fences and repairs. Words that sounded like jokes, but waited for my reaction like trips waiting for ankles. I reminded my child of late bills paid on time, of nights at the dining table turning numbers into plans. The eyes that once lit up at stories of how we made do began to glaze over. Making do started to sound like failure to someone who wanted arrival without the miles. There were still soft days. A call from school recognizing an essay that read like a confession. A mug of tea left on my bedside table when my back hurt from standing. A scarf wrapped around my neck by hands that knew the temperature of my skin better than I did. Love did not vanish. It thinned. It stretched. It became something you can see through if you hold it to the light in the wrong way. I kept building safeguards, not because I feared my child, but because I knew the world could turn sharp and I wanted our home to stay blunt. I converted the land into a small rental with a lease written in plain words. I paid attention to renewal dates the way some people watch birthdays. I moved a portion of what we owned into a structure that makes it harder for a single person to break everything on a bad day. I kept receipts. I kept logs. I kept patience. I also kept that folder close. The deed is not large, but it holds weight beyond paper. It is a map of sweat, a record of late shifts, an index of decisions I made when my hands shook but still signed. I told myself I would never use it against my child. A parent should not need to defend a home from the person they raised. Still, I checked that drawer more often than I checked the weather. I listened to the lock click and felt steadier. The first time my child hinted at inheritance like a right rather than a gift, we were eating simple food that carries memory more than flavor. The remark landed on the table like an extra plate no one wanted. I asked where the thought came from. The answer was a shrug dressed as confidence. Everybody knows how this goes. The house will be mine. The businesses will be mine. The land will be mine. It was not a question. It was the tone that told me I was being asked to confirm the script. I said the house will be a home for whoever honors it. The businesses will feed whoever keeps them honest. The land will anchor whoever remembers how we bought it. My child looked at me like I was speaking a language designed to deny joy. I did not stop the scholarships. I did not deny opportunities. I did not clip wings because I feared distance. I encouraged the internship that put my child near people who speak acquisition as if it were a prayer. I understood that growth requires rooms where no one knows your last name. I also understood that those rooms come with mirrors that show your face with a different mouth. My child began to talk like a person who had learned that other people are steps. What steps are meant for. At holidays, the house smelled like the past again, but the conversations smelled like future ownership. Plans were made that used my home as collateral before I was done washing the dishes. My child sat with new friends who praised the view through a window that faces a street where I once patched potholes with gravel because the city took too long. They made lists while I scraped plates and pretended not to hear numbers placed on things that had taken me decades to unnumber. I told myself this was a phase, but each phase left a residue, and residue builds. The affection remained, but it came with invoices attached. Gratitude turned into expectation. Help turned into requirement. I became a service provider with the title of parent. I answered requests until the requests sounded like orders. I held back anger because anger charges interest on mistakes. I held back tears because tears blur forms. When my child started using my name in place of parent, it did not come with malice, not at first. It came with a new style. A style that keeps emotion folded away unless it buys leverage. It was the same time the messages began to carry the tone of someone compiling a file. Times, dates, statements that ask you to confirm details you have not thought about in years. I knew that rhythm. It is the rhythm of a person preparing for a day when memory will not be enough. I looked for the folder again. I opened it and read the deed and the letter in the same order I always do, as if the letter still warms the deed and the deed still answers the letter. I checked the signatures. I checked the dates. I pressed the pages flat and slid them back into their sleeve. I told myself that paper is not love, but it is protection, and sometimes protection is the only way love survives long enough to be felt again. I thought of the day I first brought my child to the finished house. A key pressed into a small palm. The promise that this door will open for you when the world closes other doors. I did not imagine then that I would later need to prove that the key was not a weapon. I did not imagine I would stand in a courtroom and listen to a list of accusations that sounded like a play written by someone who had never mopped a floor at midnight. The roots of our life were deep, but they began to wrap around something sharp. Entitlement is a vine that learns your house faster than you do. It finds the cracks. It makes them look like doorways. I kept pruning, soft, careful, hopeful. I kept telling myself that love would outgrow hunger if I fed it right. But hunger eats even the hand that feeds it if it learns the wrong lesson early. When people say a family falls apart, they make it sound sudden. It is not. It is a long quiet, a series of small turnings that only look like a break when you step far enough back. From inside, it feels like adjustments. From outside, it looks like betrayal took a single day to bloom. I know better. The day my child filed the lawsuit was not the day everything changed. It was only the day a private story put on a public coat. And somewhere along the way, when I was moving winter blankets to the top shelf and tax files to the bottom, that folder shifted. I do not remember placing it where I later found it. I tell myself that I am tired, that rooms move when you live in them long enough. Still, the thought flickers when I turn off the lights. I hear the lock, I feel the key in my hand, and I ask myself why the drawer felt lighter last week. They met at a fundraiser where the air smelled like lilies and new money. I did not go. I learned what happened there in fragments. The way you learn about a storm you slept through by looking at broken branches in the morning. My child said the event was boring except for one conversation that did not feel like small talk. A woman in a fitted suit with a voice made for microphones said she had known families like ours. She said some parents confuse protection with control. She said some children end up paying for their parents' fear with their own future. My child laughed at the time and called it a bold opinion. I heard the echo later in my kitchen. Her name showed up first on a business card with raised letters, then on a caller ID, then in a calendar my child never used before. She ran a boutique firm with glass doors and quiet staff, a place where trouble walks in looking like opportunity. She studied my child with the patience of a jeweler and the appetite of a broker. She did not push. She tilted. She asked questions that sound like care, but measure angles. Do you feel seen? Are you sure your work is valued at home? Why are you not on the title? Has your parent ever explained the documents? I recognize the method. It is how people loosen bolts they plan to keep. The distance started soft. Replies came later. Visits ended earlier. Stories were cut into clever summaries designed to avoid my questions. I try not to chase. The fastest way to make a young person run is to frame concern like pursuit. I listened and counted the phrases that did not belong to my child. Phrases about legacy as if it were a prize rather than a weight. Phrases about access, liquidity, leverage. That last word sat heavy in the air. It did not belong in a home where I used to teach the value of small coins. She called me once, polite as a knife wrapped in ribbon. She said she admired my resilience, that she had read about my early years through the whispers of our town. She said she believed in uplifting the next generation. She said families get stuck in patterns that limit growth. I asked what she wanted. She said nothing at all, then named a coffee shop near her office. I did not go. Meeting on her ground would make me a character in her script. I have spent too many years learning not to hand my lines to someone else. My child brought her name into our home as if it were a new appliance. See, look how useful this is. Look how clean. Look how modern. She had shown my child case studies of children who reclaimed what they called rightful shares. She had shown them how a single misfiled paper can turn decades of work into a door anyone can kick. She had pointed out that my grips were tight. I did not deny it. Tight grips keep roofs from lifting in sudden wind. When I asked my child what they hoped to gain by letting a stranger into our private rooms, the answer arrived dressed like fairness. I want transparency. I want security. I want to know what happens if you get sick. I want to know if I am protected. The words sounded reasonable until I traced their edges and found the cuts beneath. Protection is not a takeover. Security is not a siege. Transparency is not a demand for keys to every lock you did not earn. She began to attend events where my child felt smaller and then larger in a single evening. She praised the hunger while calling it vision. She trimmed away guilt the way gardeners trim away shade. She said parents forget that wealth is meant to move. She said growth requires courage. She said courage sometimes looks like standing against the person who raised you. The grammar of rebellion can be elegant when the person teaching it does not have to live with its consequences. I watched new clothes arrive, cut in a way that made the shoulders feel broader. I watched my child speak with pauses placed like punctuation learned from people who sell certainty. I watched friends change. Old ones faded. New ones measured vacations by lines of credit and affection by gifts. I did not forbid anything. Forbidding turns curiosity into a dare. I kept the kettle clean and the kitchen light on and waited for the day when the new world would ask for rent. She started to send articles. My child forwarded them with comments that felt like rehearsals. Here is how others arrange their estates. Here is how trusts can be reshaped. Here is how guardianship can become a cage. I read every word with a pencil in hand. I circled what was true and underlined what was slanted. I left the papers on the table without a lecture. People do not hear lectures when they believe they have discovered a truth on their own. They will only hear themselves, louder. There was a dinner when my child came home late and set a folder near my plate like a question mark. The folder held a draft. The draft turned me into a custodian with limits and my child into a partner with control. Sign here and the worry ends. Sign here and the future looks smooth. The language was clean in a way that masks teeth. I asked who drew it up. My child named her as if naming a star. I said her name out loud and tasted Flint. I said I would read. I did read. Then I placed the folder back exactly where it had been and did not touch it again. I sensed that the lock on my drawer had become a character in her story. She knew there was something in this house that did not want to meet her. She told my child that secrets are tools of the weak. She said good people do not hide papers from those they love. She had never protected a home from a bad season. She had never chosen silence because it was kinder than panic. She mistook privacy for deceit because deceit is the language she trusts. My child started to practice expressions in the mirror without knowing I could see the reflection in the glass of the hallway frame. An expression that says calm while calculating. An expression that says wounded while hunting. The first time I recognized the set of that mouth, a cold fact slid into my chest. The lessons my life had taught me were being used against me. I had raised a person who could be both gentle and shrewd. Now only one side was being fed. One evening, my child came home with a smile that looked old on a young face. I knew that smile. It came from a time when I learned to keep collectors out of my doorway with promises and exact dates. It is the smile of a person who thinks they have already won and now only needs to collect. When he smiled at me that night, it was the same smile I used to give the people I lied to. I asked what had changed. My child said nothing had changed, only that clarity feels like sunlight after a long winter. I said sunlight can also bleach color from a room if it stays too long. We ate in a quiet that used to be comfort and now felt like staging. I made tea. My child took a call and walked to the balcony. I stood where I could see the reflection in the dark window. Her face lit the phone. She spoke as if she were the owner of a ship steering into harbor. My child nodded, mouth tight with a discipline I admired more when it came from love. The next days moved fast. Meetings. Notations. My child began collecting small frustrations, stacking them into a tower that looked like a case. The late fee from years ago turned into neglect. The missed call during a night shift turned into coldness. The time I said no to a car became an origin story of deprivation. I realized that stories do not need to be false to be used falsely. They only need to be trimmed, sanded, reassembled. I started to keep the folder with me instead of in the drawer. Not because I feared theft, but because the weight of it steadied me. Paper can be ballast. When I slept, I placed it under the pillow like a talisman. When I woke, I checked the edges to see if the world had tried to creep in. I told myself that I would end this without using it. I told myself that I could bring my child back with patience. I told myself many things because I needed to believe the door had not already closed. She appeared in court later, but she arrived in our life long before that. She arrived when a young person with a quick mind met the promise of shortcuts disguised as fairness. She arrived when grief in our house grew old and left a space that ambition knew how to fill. She did not plant greed. She watered what was already sprouting. That is her talent. She finds thirsty roots and calls it care. The night before the first hearing, my child sent a message that started with my name. I read it twice. It was short and polite. It asked for cooperation. It promised dignity. It used the tone of someone preparing to read from a script in a room with a clock on the wall. I typed a reply and erased it. Then I sent nothing. Silence is the only language. Some people cannot spin. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that carries no warnings. Sunlight lay across the table like a calm promise. My child arrived without notice, coat still open, phone in hand. The air changed before the door even closed. He did not sit. He did not greet. He placed a folder on the table with a motion sharp enough to cut the silence. I looked through the accounts, he said. There are transfers that make no sense. The words were heavy with someone else's grammar. They did not belong to the child I had raised. They belonged to the firm voice of that woman, the lawyer who had been whispering about fairness and rights. I asked what he meant. He slid a printout across the table. Red circles marked deposits and withdrawals, dates, and numbers that meant nothing without the story behind them. I used my savings to cover those repairs, I said. The roof, the hospital bill, the rent increase for the tenants. It is all there. He shook his head, smiling without warmth. You used joint funds. My funds. You never told me. You think you can hide things forever? I could have explained that the joint account existed only because the bank required a second name when I refinanced, that he had been too young to understand when I added him, that every transaction had been mine to make. But logic was a language that could not reach him anymore. He had learned a new one, accusation, practiced and fluent. You are twisting this, I said softly. He laughed, short and bitter. That is what guilty people say. The sound pushed something old and fragile inside me. I wanted to remind him of nights when we ate together by candlelight, of stories told to chase fear out of dark rooms, of hands held through fever. But memory has no defense in the face of greed. It becomes sentiment, dismissed with a shrug. You are talking like a stranger, I said. Maybe that is what I am, he answered. For a moment, I saw his face when he was small, how he used to run to me after a fall, cheeks wet, trusting that I could fix anything. The same eyes now looked at me as if I were a wall to climb. He paced around the table, throwing words like stones. You say you worked for me, but you worked for yourself. You call it sacrifice, but you were building control. Every gift was a leash. Every favor came with guilt attached. You did not raise me. You trapped me. I stood, trying to steady my breath. I trapped you by keeping you fed, by keeping you safe. He slammed a hand on the table. The papers jumped. By keeping everything in your name. The slap came from disbelief, not rage. My hand moved before thought did, cutting through the air with the sound of something breaking that had been breaking for years. The shock froze both of us. His eyes widened, not from pain, but recognition. He had found the proof he needed, the act that could be turned into evidence. He touched his cheek slowly, theatrically. You hit me. I tried to speak, but the words fell apart. No, he said, stepping back. Do not explain. This is who you are. He left with the folder and the silence that follows impact. The door closed like the end of a trial. I stood in the kitchen, hands still trembling, palm burning as if truth itself had left a mark. I thought I would cry, but nothing came. Guilt and love fought for the same space until neither could breathe. Later that night, I sat at the table where it happened, replaying the moment in fragments. I saw my hand rise. I saw the disbelief that had powered it. I told myself it was not violence, only a gasp made solid. But I knew what he would make of it. In a courtroom, intent does not matter. Gesture does. I picked up the fallen papers. Numbers blurred in the lamplight. I gathered them carefully, as if they were pieces of glass I might one day need to prove I had been careful. The phone buzzed once, a message I did not open. I knew what it said, accusation wrapped in calm phrasing. I turned the phone face down. Sleep refused to come. The house was too quiet, like it was listening. I walked from room to room, touching walls, checking locks, finding comfort in small routines. Each familiar object seemed to have shifted allegiance. Even the framed photograph of the three of us, before death, before ambition, felt staged, a moment waiting to be used as contrast. Near dawn, I stepped onto the porch. The city was still, gray before sunrise. I remembered when he used to stand here beside me, counting stars, asking questions about things that had no answers. Why does the moon follow us? Why do grown-ups lie? Why do some people forget what they promised? I had answered those questions once. Now I was the answer to one of them. By the time daylight climbed over the houses, I knew what had to happen. I made tea and sat at the table again, this time with the folder open. Inside was the deed, the letter, the records of everything I had built. I read them not for strategy, but for strength. These papers were my quiet truth. If the fight was coming, I would meet it without flinching. I looked at my hand, the same one that had worked, protected, and, yes, struck. I pressed it flat against the folder, as if sealing a pact. From now on, every move would be deliberate. Love would not stop me from defending myself. When he smiled at me that night, I had seen something I had never wanted to see, my own reflection, sharp and cautious. Now I understood what that meant. I had been training him all his life to survive in a world that takes without asking. He had learned too well. I turned off the lights and watched the shadows settle. Somewhere, a clock began to tick like a slow verdict. I whispered to the empty room, not as confession, but as warning. You will not ruin what I built. Not with lies. Not with blood. The war had already started. I just had not called it that yet. The papers were filed on a Tuesday that looked harmless. The sky was clean, the air was ordinary, and the envelope was thick. A courier said my name and held it out with the same tired politeness he would give a menu. Inside, the language wore a crisp suit. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, emotional neglect that spanned years and left measurable harm. The claim listed dates like stones arranged across a river, inviting a court to walk across them and reach a story that was not mine. My phone lit up before I finished the first page. Screenshots flew through group chats I did not know still had my number. A cousin who had once slept on my floor wrote a message with no greeting. People choose money over family every day. I stared at that line until the words separated. Choose. Money. Family. Day. The order was the point. My face began to appear on small blogs that live off sharper headlines than facts. Parent hoards wealth while child suffers. The comments bloomed like mold, fast and confident. Strangers spoke as if they had eaten at my table and counted the spoons. The first call was from an old friend who loved gossip more than truth. They did not ask how I was. They asked if it was true that I had locked my son out of his birthright to punish him for independence. I said no. They said the article looked convincing. People want a story that lets them feel clean about their dirt. Mine tasted perfect for that. I went to my lawyer's office with the folder under my arm and no plan beyond not breaking. He read in silence, stopping only to press his thumb to the bridge of his nose when a sentence tried to look honest by standing very straight. He asked me to walk him through the transfers, the hospital nights, the roof, the tenants, the lease, the day the bank nearly swallowed the house. I spoke without performance. He listened like a mechanic under a car, tapping bolts, learning which parts would hold and which parts needed new metal. When I finished, he closed the file and asked a question that tried to be gentle and landed hard. Would you consider settling? My stomach turned. He said the climate was bad, the optics worse, the courtroom unpredictable, and the press already circling. He said juries forgive tears faster than balance sheets. He said even if I won, I would lose months of peace and a good share of my name. I said my name was already in the street, and I was still breathing. He said he had to say this because it is his job to count cost before courage. I walked home while the city made its afternoon deals. People laughed into phones, cars argued at lights, a child dropped a bag of chips, and a dog solved the problem. It looked like any day. Inside me, something steady shifted into gear. I did not feel noble. I felt old and clear. I had carried rooms across years without asking for witnesses. I could carry this. By evening, the case had its own small weather system. A website posted a photo of my door. A neighbor texted to warn me that a reporter had asked whether I refused to comment because I had something to hide. I boiled water for tea and let it whistle before lifting the kettle, a tiny sound that said I still chose the rhythm here. I turned off the porch light and watched the street from behind the curtain like a soldier checking for movement beyond the fence. Family peeled away quietly. There were no fights, just a soft retreat. Invitations stopped. The group chat where people share funerals and recipes fell silent on my screen. My sister wrote 2 lines that did not match each other. I love you. He is our future. I typed a reply that said nothing and sent it because the only thing worse than silence is a message that can be screenshot and passed around like a coin. The second meeting with my lawyer was sharper. He had marked every paragraph in red and blue, facts against spin. He said we would not fight every lie. We would starve some of them. He taught me how to sit in a chair and give a yes or a no without anger. He told me what to wear and what not to wear. Do not try to look poor. Do not try to look rich. Do not nod when you are listening. The other side will call that agreement. Do not shake your head. The other side will call that disrespect. Breathe through your nose and keep your hands still. He said the other lawyer had a reputation for turning family love into kindling. He warned me that a certain question would come, the one designed to make a parent confess regret loud enough to stain the record. If you had a chance to do it over, would you give your son more? There is no correct answer for that in a room that wants blood. I practiced saying I gave what I had, and sometimes more than that. It felt like trying to thread a needle while the floor rolled beneath me. Reporters found my street. They wanted a look that could double as a sentence. I opened the door once and said 5 words. The case is with the court. That phrase is not a shield, but it is a fence. They left because fences bore them. At night, the house spoke in the old ways. Pipes clicked, the fridge breathed, the porch groaned as if it carried a memory of small feet learning balance. I walked through rooms like a guard in a museum, checking that each artifact of our life still hung straight. The photo of my child in a school play had slid sideways. I fixed it and stood back. The face in the frame looked open in a way I no longer recognized. I said the name I had not used in months and heard the echo come back empty. Court dates landed on the calendar like storms on a map. My lawyer sent me a schedule that looked like an itinerary for grief. Deposition, discovery, motions, hearings. Each word promised a day of careful cruelty. I prepared the way poor people prepare for winter. I made lists. I wrote down small things that are easy to forget when a mouth is dry. Eat. Carry water. Sit near the door at breaks for air. Bring a pen that does not skip. Wear shoes that do not blister. These are not heroic notes. They are the tools that keep a person from sinking while other people argue about the size of the wave. When the petition for temporary control of assets arrived, my lawyer called me at once. He said they were trying to freeze accounts and put a monitor on my transactions. He asked if there were any transfers that could be read as evasive. I said no. I do not move money in the dark. He smiled without joy and said that would not stop them from calling day dusk. He filed an answer that used dates like armor and receipts like arrows. He asked me to bring the deed and the letter. I held the folder tighter and said I would bring them when it was time. He studied my face and did not push. Trust grows between people who have stood in bad weather together, even for a short time. My son began to act like a person whose grief had hardened into currency. He gave a statement outside the courthouse that traveled across screens. He spoke softly about a childhood that sounded like mine only in outline. He praised me in a way that made praise feel like a ladder he had climbed beyond. He said he wished it had not come to this. He said no child sues a parent without deep pain. I did not throw the remote. I did not throw anything. Breaking a thing in your own house only proves the wrong point. Friends asked why I would not just sign something graceful to end the noise. I said grace is not the same as surrender. I said a parent does not teach a child right from wrong by rewarding wrong when wrong hires a publicist. They said I was stubborn. I said I was still alive. Stubborn is the word people use when they want you to die politely. We sat with my lawyer in a room that smelled like paper and old coffee and decided which truths to release and which truths to keep in reserve. He said patience would make the other side talk too much. He said they would reach for a win so early that they would put their hand where I could see it. He asked for my silence. He asked for my stillness. He asked me to walk into court like a person who knows the weight of quiet. I left his office near dusk. The city washed itself in orange and then slid gray. I passed a barber sweeping hair into a small mountain, a couple arguing softly in a doorway, a child dragging a stick along a fence to hear music where none was planned. Life keeps going, indifferent to private wars. That indifference calmed me. I went home and opened the folder at the kitchen table and read the letter line by line, the same way I read it on the night it was written, when I had more love than furniture. The deed lay beneath it like a spine. I closed the folder and placed it back without hiding it as deep as before. The next morning, my lawyer called to say the judge had denied the immediate freeze. The other side would try again. He said they were angry now. Angry people explain themselves too much. He wanted to schedule a press response. I said no. Let the other side feed the fire. I would not stand near it. He wanted to destroy me in court. I was about to destroy him with silence. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in spirit. It felt like a space designed to strip emotion from human stories until all that remained was paper, signatures, and versions of the truth trimmed to fit. The wood panels shone with the kind of polish that hides how many lives have cracked open here. I sat at the defense table, my lawyer on one side, a glass of water untouched on the other. Across from me sat my child, the person I had fed, sheltered, taught, and now faced as an adversary. He would not meet my eyes. The lawyer beside him adjusted papers with clinical grace, the same way surgeons prepare instruments before cutting. I recognized him. His name had once appeared on my payroll, back when I ran a small firm that built contracts for people who could not afford large ones. He had been young then, eager, grateful. I had taught him how to argue without cruelty. I had given him his first recommendation letter. Now he was polishing his glasses before dismantling me in front of strangers. Betrayal was turning out to be a familiar face. The judge entered, calm, sharp, deliberate. The gavel hit once, and noise scattered like startled birds. My lawyer leaned slightly toward me and murmured, Let them talk first. I nodded. Talking was what my son had been taught to do. Listening was what I had learned through survival. The opposing lawyer began with a tone of practiced regret. He painted a picture that would move even a stone. A child denied affection. A parent drunk on control. Years of emotional starvation masked as discipline. He used pauses as weapons, silence as glue. Then my son took the stand. He looked smaller from where I sat, though the suit and tie gave him height. He swore the oath with steady hands. His voice trembled, but only enough to sound believable. The first tears came before the second paragraph of his testimony. The room shifted with him. Sympathy has its own gravity. He told them about empty birthdays, about promises broken, about a slap that echoed louder in memory than in fact. He spoke of manipulation disguised as care, of funds moved without consent, of control that smothered potential. Each word landed softly, calculated to bruise without looking violent. I watched him cry, and the memory of wiping his tears as a child returned uninvited. He had learned well. Even the pauses were familiar, the same rhythm he used when he wanted more dessert. The judge watched him the way a scientist watches a rare reaction. My lawyer wrote notes with a calm face that betrayed nothing. I kept my gaze fixed on a spot near the witness stand, not on his eyes but on the space between us, that invisible wall built from everything unsaid. When it was time for cross-examination, my lawyer rose. His tone was even, his questions direct. You say you were excluded from financial matters. How did you access the accounts to verify transactions? My son hesitated. I had the passwords. Given or taken? The pause stretched. The room heard the answer even before he spoke it. The lawyer pressed further, gently, the way water presses on cracks in a rock. You allege emotional neglect. Can you tell us how many times your parent attended your school meetings, signed your medical forms, or financed your education? My son's answers shrank each time. The lawyer did not smile. He simply let the facts walk themselves across the room. But my silence, that was my weapon. I did not flinch. I did not sigh. I let the air grow heavier until even the clerk's pen slowed. Every courtroom has a rhythm. Today's rhythm belonged to restraint. When my lawyer mentioned that the plaintiff's counsel had once been an employee of mine, the judge's eyebrows lifted. My son's lawyer froze for half a breath. The courtroom air turned sharp. My son blinked, confusion crossing his face for a second. It was subtle, but enough. Betrayal on two fronts always leaves a mark, one outside, one inside. The lawyer tried to recover, claiming coincidence. My lawyer said coincidence does not usually come with a signature on an old payroll ledger. I watched the judge jot something down, a small motion that said the game had just changed direction. The rest of the hearing unfolded like chess played in slow motion. The opposing side showed emotion, we showed patience. The judge saw both. My son's voice cracked as he described how I had refused love in favor of power. The words hurt not because they were true, but because they sounded practiced, like lines from a script that had been rehearsed too many times. During recess, I stayed seated while others left for coffee. I needed the stillness. The wood grain of the table reminded me of home, of the one I built with these hands. A bailiff passed by and whispered, "You are holding yourself better than most." I nodded, grateful for the small acknowledgement. When the session resumed, my lawyer called no witnesses. He simply asked the court to note that all the accusations rested on interpretation, not fact. My client chooses silence, he said, because silence, unlike anger, cannot be misquoted. The judge studied me for a moment, perhaps expecting a reaction. I gave none. My son's lawyer looked unsettled. He had prepared for a fight, not for still water that refuses to ripple. He launched one last attack, reading aloud the text messages where my words could be trimmed to sound cruel. I listened and recognized my own voice, cut out of context. Words meant to teach now dressed as threats. Each sentence twisted until it limped. Still, I said nothing. Silence filled the room like fog, quiet, steady, impossible to grasp. My lawyer leaned back and folded his notes. The judge called for adjournment until next week. The gavel fell again, and the noise of shuffling chairs covered the sound of my heart breaking a little more. As I gathered my papers, I saw my son glance my way. For a fraction of a second, guilt flickered behind his eyes, fragile as a candle in wind. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite arrogance his mentor had taught him. He left with his lawyer, the one I had once trained to argue with grace. Their silhouettes moved in sync, mentor and student now united against their old teacher. Outside, reporters waited, cameras flashing like lightning. Questions flew, accusations wrapped in curiosity. I kept walking. My lawyer whispered to stay quiet. I did not need the reminder. Silence was already doing its work. In the car, he turned to me. "You won that round," he said. I shook my head. No one wins in this kind of war. We just survive the days until the truth grows loud enough to speak for itself. He nodded, adjusting his tie. Still, that lawyer of his looked shaken when your name came up. I would not be surprised if he makes a mistake soon. I looked out the window at the courthouse steps shrinking behind us. People always reveal themselves when they think they are untouchable. He smiled faintly. That is why I asked you to stay silent. I watched the city roll past. Indifferent faces, open shops, normal life. Inside me, something darker and calmer had settled. I was no longer defending a house or money. I was defending memory from distortion. The courtroom would keep our secrets until the next hearing, but silence had already started to carve cracks into the lies. He wanted to destroy me in court. I was about to destroy him with silence. I took the key from the small ceramic dish where I keep old coins and hospital tags. It is a plain key, dull gray, filed smooth by years in and out of a pocket that also carried receipts and bus tickets. I had not used it in a long time. I pressed the edge into my palm until the shape printed a crescent there. Pain focuses the mind in ways speeches cannot. The locker is in a bank that smells like carpet and guarded optimism. The guard at the door nodded as if he remembered a version of me who used to arrive with a worried face and leave with a calmer one. I signed my name in a ledger that holds thousands of shaky signatures that all look like last lines of defense. The clerk guided me to the back, past muted glass and quiet doors, into the small room where people meet their private truths. The box slid forward with the soft scrape of metal on metal. I set it on the table and waited a breath before opening it. The first thing I saw was the envelope. Cream paper, edges browned, my name written in a hand I still know better than my own. I did not open it right away. I touched the ink where the strokes grow heavy at the end of each word, the way they always did when my spouse wrote in a hurry and then slowed to make it neat for me. Beneath the envelope lay the deed, clipped to a bundle of records that have the weight of months spent denying small luxuries so that a future could stand. I opened the letter. It began the way all letters written in fear begin, with love trying to sound steady. My spouse had written it the week the doctor said the quiet word that rearranges a family in an hour. It told me to breathe, to hold steady, to secure the home before grief could make me careless. Then it laid out steps, dates, names, notaries. The decision to move title into a structure that keeps the roof from being pulled off by a single bad season or a single bad choice. The decision to register the rental as a separate entity so that one fire would not burn two houses. The decision to set conditions that protect the next generation from appetite dressed as need. Each line was a hand on my back, steady and precise. There was a paragraph about our child. It was not soft. It was clear. It said that love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. It said that gifts without guardrails turn into debts later. It said that if our child grew with grace, the door would open at the right time. And if our child grew with teeth, the door would stay locked until they learned to use their hands for building, not grabbing. The letter named the witness who sat with us that cold morning when we signed before work and school, the witness who has since moved away but can be found if needed. It named the box number. It named this key. I read the last line twice. If the day comes when you are accused of hoarding what we built, remember that we built it so that one person's anger could not break all of it. Do not let sorrow make you weak. Do not let rage make you clumsy. Timing will be your shield. I placed the letter flat on the table, then held the deed up to the light. The watermark glowed. The dates lined up with the time I remember cooking soup late into the night because neither of us could sleep. The signatures matched the memory burned into my hands of holding a pen too tight. The trust document sat behind it, clipped with a metal fastener that has left a mark on the paper like a long finger. The language is plain. It grants use. It limits sale. It assigns stewardship to me with obligations recorded in a ledger I have kept faithfully. It names our child as a beneficiary with conditions that read like a gentle test of character rather than a gate. The power of those pages was not in what they gave me. It was in what they prevented. They make sudden storms survivable. They make one spiteful afternoon fail to undo 20 years. They turn a courtroom speech into a shadow on a wall. I closed my eyes and let the first wave of relief pass through, followed by the second wave of grief. I wanted to call my child right then, tell them to come to the bank, lay everything on the table, and end this. But the letter warned me about that urge. Good evidence used at the wrong time becomes smoke. If I moved too early, the other side would pivot, recast, smear, delay. If I moved too late, mud would stick long enough to matter. The only advantage I had left was control over when truth walks into the room. I copied what I needed to copy. I made a log of every page, every seal, every date, the names of clerks, and the time on the wall clock. I placed the original letter back in its envelope, put the envelope back in the box, and let the lid slide shut with a sound that felt like a promise. I kept certified copies folded into the folder I already carry, and a second set went into a separate envelope that I would place with someone who has no stake except loyalty earned long ago. On the way home, I walked the long route. I let the streets pass one by one, old shops giving way to new. The bakery that survived 3 rent hikes by selling bread that tastes like mornings we thought would last forever. I tried to remember every moment that had led to this point, not so I could hold a grudge, but so I could hold a straight line. At home, I spread the copies on the table and read them again under the kitchen light. I practiced saying dates without wobble. I practiced telling the story without embroidery, without pain spilling into the words and drowning the facts. I imagined the face of the judge, the one whose eyes measured my son's tears last week. I imagined the lawyer I once mentored, the one standing beside my child now, the one who will feel a pinch the moment he hears the witness name written in my spouse's careful hand. He knows that name. He once asked that person to notarize his first big case. I wrote a short note and sealed it with the second set of copies. The note said only this: if I am unable to speak, this speaks for me. It included instructions for my lawyer on when and how to produce the documents. Not at the first swing. Not during a show of false sorrow. At the moment when the story they built reaches for a roof beam that does not exist. Then, and only then, I slept with the folder under the pillow that night. Not because paper protects a person while they sleep, but because lungs sometimes need to rest on certainty. In the early hours, I woke to a simple thought that sat in the dark like a chair I had forgotten to move. My child will not retreat when faced with truth. Pride rarely learns that step. Pride will attack the document itself, attack signatures, attack dates, call the witness a liar, call love a scheme. I had to be ready for that second storm. The next morning, I visited the one person who knows our history without decoration. An old neighbor who fed me when the money ran thin and fed my child when I worked late. I asked her to hold the envelope I had prepared. She did not ask questions. She has that rare strength that respects silence in times like these. She slid the envelope into a tin where she keeps seeds for the next season. That felt right. My lawyer called at noon with a plan for the next hearing. He wanted me to speak. He said the judge had seen me still. Now the judge should see me steady. I said yes, but only after the other side makes their cleanest blow. I told him about the locker without sending copies yet. He paused for a long second, then said the one sentence that matched the last line of the letter. We will win this with timing, not noise. All day I moved through rooms with a strange calm. Even the photograph on the shelf, tilted from the last dusting, seemed to straighten on its own. The house felt less like a battlefield and more like a fort where supplies have finally arrived. Memory held me. Duty steadied me. Love hurt me, but it did not bend me. At dusk, I stood by the window and watched the street turn gray. I could feel the future pressing against the glass. I could feel the letter in my hands, even when it was back in the box. I could hear my spouse's voice in the lines. Protect the home. Protect the truth. Protect the child from becoming a person who eats the table and then complains there is nowhere to sit. I will not waste what that letter cost to write. I will not use it to humiliate. I will not wave it like a flag. I will hold it like a surgeon holds a scalpel, still and sure. And I will cut only when the cut will heal something that must be mended. He thinks the courtroom will finish me. He does not know that I am holding the one page that turns a flood into a puddle. The question is not whether I can end this. The question is when. I began to change the shape of my silence. Before it was a wall. Now, it became a mirror. I stopped correcting small falsehoods. I stopped swatting at every rumor like a fly. When the other side asked for a bundle of minor records, I gave them more than they expected, not less. Receipts for paint, a note from a plumber, old utility bills with my late spouse's initials in the corner. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that carried a headline. I learned long ago that people who expect to fight grow careless when they meet a hand that does not push back. My child posted a message that afternoon in a tone meant to sound graceful. The world read triumph between the lines. Comments flowed like a tide that had chosen a side. Protect the brave one. Stand with the truth teller. People shared photos of us they found on old pages and wrote captions that turned years into captions too neat to be real. I did not answer. The house stayed quiet. The kettle sang at the usual hour. I cleaned the table where we had once done homework and let the grain show through, a small act of refusal to let strangers narrate my rooms. The first small victory I gave them came wrapped in procedure. We allowed an inspection of the rental as if we had nothing to guard. The inspector arrived with a clipboard and an eager lens. He found a door that sticks and a window latch that needs oil. He found nothing that can carry an accusation across a courtroom. The other side still declared it progress. I let them. I have seen this pattern before in other wars. Call a step a leap, then start walking faster to keep up with your own boast. My lawyer and I mapped a slow arc. We would concede what did not matter and guard what did. We would let them paint a picture and then show the room from a different angle. He taught me how to set a pace that feels like drift to the impatient. He said people who thirst for trophies mistake quiet for weakness. I said I know that thirst. I have watched it grow in a face I love. The second small victory came in discovery. We handed over a tidy stack of bank statements that told a story of bills paid on time and rents collected in order. In that stack sat 2 transfers that the other side circled in red and held up as proof of my greed. I knew they would. Those transfers were repayment of a bridge I built for a neighbor when illness swallowed his hours. The neighbor had already sent a letter explaining this, dated and signed, but we did not reveal it yet. We let the circles glow in their folder like trophy marks. I slept well that night. The threads online tightened. My child smiled into cameras with new restraint, as if coached to appear both wounded and noble. A hashtag rose and began to climb. People filmed themselves outside the court steps, hands on hearts, voices full of conviction they had borrowed in a minute. Even some old friends reposted those videos without thinking about where the certainty came from. I watched the clips once and then turned off the sound. I will not let strangers' voices drown the voice that kept this home alive. A week later, my lawyer called me in and closed the door. He spoke in a low tone to make sure the air carried his plan and nothing else. He would step aside for a time. Not in truth, but in filing. He would file a motion to withdraw, citing irreconcilable views. The move would look like a split. It would look like fear. It would taste like victory to the other side. He said the goal was simple: tempt pride into speech. When pride speaks, it forgets to hide motive. I sat with the idea until the room stopped spinning. Then I nodded. He prepared the paperwork and set a schedule with me in the same precise way we once set meal plans for lean months. He would withdraw on a Friday when the news cycle is hungry. He would leave one thread visible, a single line stating I would proceed pro se until new counsel appeared. He said the phrase was bait. He said they would not be able to resist a jab. The motion went in. The court clock accepted it with the same cold efficiency that accepts everything. Within an hour, the other side posted a smile disguised as concern. My child's lawyer gave a statement outside the building about a parent who cannot keep counsel because truth resists representation. He did not say my name, but he did not need to. My child shared the clip with a line about standing strong in the face of abandonment. The comments surged again. The tide loves a story with simple currents. I stayed home that evening and let the street noise be my music. I kept my phone face down. Temptation tried to turn me into a responder. I refused it. I cooked food that holds together in a pot and lets a person think while stirring. I cut herbs the way my spouse used to do, small and neat, as if order in the bowl could make order in the world. When the dish was done, I ate slowly and read the letter one more time. Timing will be your shield. The words steadied my hand the way a railing steadies a tired body on late stairs. The next day brought the turn we wanted. A recording from a private event leaked, bumpy and a little muffled, clear enough to wound. My child spoke to a small circle of donors and friends, voice steady, smile thin. The phrases slid out like polished stones. Once the court grants control, we can liquidate underperforming assets. The old house has more sentimental value than market value. The rental can be restructured. With the right capital, growth is rapid. A laugh followed, brief and sharp, when someone asked about my place in this plan. The answer did not carry sorrow. The answer carried numbers. The clip spread through the same channels that had crowned him brave. Some people flinched. Others doubled down. The lawyer tried to call it context. Context is a word people reach for when someone has said exactly what they mean. I did not gloat. I pressed both palms on the table and felt the wood answer with its slow, faithful strength. My lawyer returned to me, quietly, through a letter stamped with the court seal. His withdrawal was now a note in the record. His presence was a note in my life. He visited at dusk, and we sat without turning on the main light. He said we would not waste energy on rebuttal statements. We would let the leaked clip do the speaking we could never do without looking cruel. We would use the court's own schedule to herd the story back to fact. He outlined the next hearing. He wanted me to bring the neighbor's letter and the lease. He wanted me to bring calm. I began to give the other side one more illusion. I arrived late to 2 minor conferences and asked for one reschedule due to fatigue. All true. Still, I knew how it looked. They read my slow steps as crumbling. They began to laugh too early in hallways. They began to speak within earshot about agreement terms that included a timeline I had never seen. Pride again. Pride opens a door it does not notice. On social pages, the tide swelled and then began to eddy. A few quiet voices asked why a loving child needs liquidation plans before a verdict. A small blog that once attacked me posted that leaked clip again without commentary and let the words sit. A relative who had turned away sent me a message at dawn that said only, "I heard it." I wrote back, "I know." In the middle of this, I gave them one last small win. We consented to a narrow review of medical bills from a year when life pressed on us from all sides. I knew what they would say. They would call help for a neighbor theft. They would call groceries for a funeral extravagance. I let them try. They filed a motion dressed in high language that reduced mercy to math. Then we filed the neighbor's letter. We filed the receipt where the neighbor repaid. We filed the text that said, "Thank you for keeping my lights on when my house went dark." And we filed nothing else. The judge does not enjoy being used for theater. The room felt it. Through all of this, I kept the deed copies wrapped in the same brown paper I have used for years. I moved through the days with the calm of a person who knows where the support beams stand. I did not wave proof. I did not flash seals. I waited for the moment when the other side would stand on air and call it a floor. My child sent one more message late one night, polite and cold. It asked me to consider a proposal that would grant them full control while allowing me a stipend that would keep me comfortable. The word stung more than the numbers. Comfortable is the word people use when they plan to move you out of your own rooms gently. I answered with a single line. I built this. I will not rent it from my child. We are close now. I can feel the case tightening like a knot that wants the right touch to come loose. I can feel the judge's patience thinning, the way a teacher's patience thins when a student mistakes performance for learning. I can feel my spouse's letter in my pocket like a pulse. I will not waste the cut. I will not go early. I will wait until their story reaches for a beam that is not there, and then I will name the wood. He thinks the noise is winning him the crowd. He does not see that patience is pulling nails from his stage one by one. When the floor drops, it will not be the volume that saves me. It will be the quiet he laughed at. The oath felt light on my tongue and heavy in my chest. I said the words and sat, hands flat on the rail, eyes steady on a point just past the judge's left shoulder. The microphone made the room closer than it looked. I could hear the rasp of a pen, the click of a bracelet, the small cough of a man who wanted attention but did not earn it. Across from me, my child sat with a straight back and a jaw set for victory. I did not look there long. A parent can drown in a single glance. My lawyer asked me to state my name, then asked nothing soft. He opened doors I had kept shut for years, doors that led to kitchens where rent notices sat under fruit, to mornings when I ironed 2 shirts because there was no time to fail, to nights when fever broke at 3 and I still went to work at 6. I did not raise my voice. I let the facts carry their own weight. I said I paid bills with hands that shook, that I stretched meals without letting a child notice the stretch, that I learned paperwork like a second language because a wrong box costs more than a right intention. I said I made mistakes. I said I learned. The court likes clean lines. Life rarely draws them. I told both truths. He asked about the transfers that had been circled in red. I said they were repayments for money I loaned when a neighbor could not keep lights on and pride would not let him ask twice. I said the money left my account and then came back months later, not because I demanded it, but because dignity is a muscle old people protect. He marked the exhibit and moved on. He did not linger. We had already filed the neighbor's letter. The judge had read it. The room had felt it. He asked about the roof that nearly fell, the tenant who paid late and stayed honest, the hospital bill that arrived like a bad tide and receipted only after I called the billing office every day for a week. I spoke about those calls in the same tone I used on the calls. Polite. Relentless. I said I did not sleep much that month and that I made food I could eat standing. A few people in the gallery nodded without knowing they were nodding. Some stories speak to the body first. He asked about the day my hand moved faster than thought. The slap. The room drew breath. I did not defend it. I said I was wrong to let disbelief turn into contact. I said I did not raise a hand to make fear. I raised a hand because grief ran out of words. I said intent does not erase impact, and that I carry shame for that moment the way people carry old injuries that ache when the weather changes. The judge watched my face, not my hands. The clerk stopped writing for a second. My child did not move. He asked why I did not settle when given polite offers tied to stipends and promises. I said a home is not a prize to be held over a parent like a leash. I said money can be shared, but power given to appetite will eat the plate. I said I would share without being erased. The sentence sounded quiet to me. It sounded like a bell to some in the gallery. Even the bailiff shifted his weight. My lawyer sat. The other side stood. The man I once hired on a hope walked toward me with the care of someone crossing ice. He smiled with a mouth that did not reach his eyes. He wanted me to rise to anger. He wanted to draw me into a sharp corner and leave me there. He asked me if I had ever said hard words to my child. I said yes. He asked if I had ever denied something my child wanted. I said yes. He asked if I enjoyed control. I said I enjoyed order because chaos breaks poor people first. He read a message aloud where I told my child no to a car. He read only the no. He did not read the part that offered a bus pass and a budget and a plan. He asked if the slap proved I was cruel. I said it proved I am human and that I am sorry. He tried to follow with a speech about cycles of harm. He did not find traction. The room had seen tears earlier. Now it was seeing spine. He asked about the accounts. He wanted me to say I used my child's name to build something that belonged to me alone. I said the bank asked for 2 names on a day. I was holding on to work by threads. I said I added my child as a formality and told that child later, when a person could understand what formalities do. He asked why I never put my child on the title to the house. I said the house carries history like bone carries marrow. I said when a person writes a title, they write a promise. I said promises require character and time. He tried to make character sound like punishment. The judge's eyes cooled. He brought up the fundraiser, the lawyer who became a mentor, the new world my child had entered as if it were a right. He asked if I felt threatened by success. I said success does not frighten me. I have scrubbed floors under it, fixed wiring behind it, poured concrete beneath it. He asked if I feared losing control. I said I feared losing a son to a story that pays well but costs everything. He pushed where he thought the wood was soft. He asked about birthdays without cakes, about lights that went dark for a night, about shoes mended instead of replaced. He tried to plant shame in those details. I said those nights made the mornings that came after them. I said love shows up with soup and rent money and 2 shifts on a day when the body begs for one. I said my child ate first. Always first. He showed the leaked clip and called it a private brainstorm. He said it was taken out of context. He said all households plan. He asked why planning to liquidate underperforming assets is wrong. I said the word underperforming does not belong in a mouth that never scrubbed mildew from a bathroom that kept a roof over a head. He flinched. He recovered. He told me I was sentimental. I told him I am exact. He asked me to say I would have done more for my child if I had more to give. I said I gave what I had and sometimes more than that, and that on the days I could not give more, I taught skills that last longer than money. I listed them. How to read a contract. How to fix a hinge. How to apologize. How to ask questions that save you from debt. He tried to interrupt. The judge held up a hand. He changed shape then. The voice softened. He asked if I loved my child. The question hung in the room like smoke. I said love is not soft to the touch, not always. Love in this house is hands that lift and feet that walk to buses at dawn. Love in this house can count. Love in this house does not sign away a roof for applause. He circled back to my silence. He asked if my silence in the early days of this case was part of a plan to manipulate public opinion. I said my silence was the only thing I owned that could not be edited. The gallery breathed. He asked if I am proud. I said I am alive. Some mistakes get called pride by people who were never asked to hold a line while wind tore at it. He stepped close then, too close, thinking he saw weakness at last. He asked if I felt I had lost a son. The word hit me hard. I chose the truth that hurt most. I said I did not lose my son today. He lost the only person who would still forgive him. The judge did not move. The room did. You can feel a room turn the way you can feel weather turn. Chairs creaked. Paper stopped. A reporter lowered a camera as if the moment did not need a lens. My child's eyes flickered, not with rage, not with victory, but with a small flash of grief that looked like a person seeing a door close from the wrong side. My lawyer rose for one more question. He asked me what I wanted from this court. I said I want nothing the law cannot give. Keep the house where it is. Keep the small business anchored. Keep the accounts from being drained by plans that use numbers like knives. Leave me with my name intact enough to wear home. The rest I will settle at a table no one can legislate. The judge thanked me and told me to step down. My knees felt older than they had that morning. The rail felt warm under my hand, as if many hands had left comfort there for the next person who needed it. I walked back to my seat and did not look at my child. I looked at the door. A parent can drown in a glance. A parent can also survive by choosing not to take one more breath underwater. Outside, light fell across the floor in long strips. It looked like a road. I sat. I waited. I drank the water that had warmed while I spoke. It tasted like metal and faith. The hearing moved on, but the room had already shifted. Truth does not roar. It settles. The morning of the next hearing I dressed like a person who intends to finish what was started. No flourish. Clean lines. The folder lay on the table, its edges squared. I slid the certified copies into a thinner sleeve and kept the originals where they belong. I ran a hand over the paper the way people run hands over stones that have held a path for years. The letter breathed through the envelope. The deed pressed its quiet weight into my palm. I locked the door behind me and walked. The courtroom watched me take my seat with the patience of a place that has seen 1,000 dramas and will see 1,000 more. My child sat with that same stillness that had begun to look like a mask fitted by another hand. The lawyer who once worked for me stared at his notes as if they could give him a new face. My lawyer leaned close. "The timing is right," he said. I nodded. I had known that since the second the leak taught the room what motive sounds like when it forgets shame. The judge asked for any remaining evidence. The other side stood first, full of confidence earned from noise. They submitted a chart that turned red circles into a life story. They submitted statements that confused help with theft. They submitted a photograph of me leaving the bank as if the act of guarding a life is guilt. The judge received it without a ripple. Then my lawyer rose. He did not begin with a speech. He began with a number, box number, then a date, then a name. He presented the court with certified copies of the trust deed executed years ago under my late spouse's signature and mine, notarized by the witness named in the letter. He offered the affidavit from that witness, who remembered the winter morning when we signed in a quiet office that smelled like old paper and courage. He presented registry confirmations stamped with the state seal. He laid each page down as if placing cards in a game only one side understands. The judge read. The room adjusted its breath. My child's lawyer rose to object on foundation. My lawyer addressed chain of custody with the calm of a person who has already tied each knot. He handed up bank box ledgers, entry logs, and a clerk's sworn statement. He named the branch manager who could testify to box access dates. He did not yield space. He did not reach for effect. He let the record hold. Then he lifted the envelope. "Your Honor," he said, "this is the original letter written by my client's spouse in the week of diagnosis, sealed and stored with the deed. With the court's permission, I will read the material paragraphs into the record." The judge nodded. The room leaned. He read the lines that set out the plan to secure the home against sudden storms. He read the lines that defined stewardship and named our child as beneficiary subject to conditions that protect the roof from appetite. He read the line that said timing will be your shield. I sat with my hands open on my lap and watched the words leave the paper and enter the room. The letter did not accuse. It instructed. It did not wound. It warned. The judge asked for dates one more time. My lawyer answered in a cadence that lands. Deed executed on this date. Recorded on that date. Trust funded under Schedule A. With rental assigned separately. With powers limited under Section 3. With sale constrained except under conditions that require dual signatures and court oversight. He pointed to each seal. He showed the watermark. He walked the judge through the architecture the way a builder walks a client through a frame before walls go up. Even the court reporter looked up. The other side tried a quick pivot. They said the trust was a sham. They said it was a recent construction. They said the dates could be forged. My lawyer had anticipated that reach. He called the clerk from the registry. The clerk testified to the entry in the old ledger, the one stored off-site, handwritten in ink that fades at the edges. He submitted a scan of the page. He submitted the notary's expired commission records that matched the year. He submitted a bank statement showing the box rental charge from the same month the letter was written. The judge read all of it. The room felt the floor settle. Then came the part that made the air thin. A forensic document examiner gave a short report on the plaintiff's financial exhibits. Not a broad attack. A narrow cut. The metadata on a set of spreadsheets did not align with the dates they claimed to represent. The font package used in one table did not exist on the operating system version stamped in the file properties for the date listed. A trivial detail to most. A fracture line to a judge. The examiner spoke without drama, like a person reading temperature. The meaning was clear. Someone handled numbers after the fact and called it a diary. My child's lawyer objected that such analysis belongs later. The judge overruled with a small, precise word. The court will hear it. My child's face tightened, then smoothed. That smoothing hurt me more than the flinch would have. It looked practiced. My lawyer did not push further than necessary. He stopped at the exact point where truth stood on its own legs. He asked the court to take judicial notice that property held in a properly constituted trust is not subject to unilateral control by a beneficiary and cannot be seized through the kind of order the plaintiff sought. He asked the court to recognize that the claim of ongoing misappropriation collapses where stewardship is recorded and audited. He sat. The room was quiet the way rooms are quiet when all the glass has been swept and people can see the floor again. The judge turned toward the other table. Counsel, the court invites response. The man I once hired swallowed. He began with confidence and found less of it as he went. He spoke of feelings. He spoke of intention. He tried to put weight back on a beam that had just proven itself smoke. He reached for outrage and grabbed air. He asked for time to review the new documents. He asked for a continuance. The judge granted a brief one and set strict limits. The gavel touched down like a finger tapping a map. During recess, whispers dragged across the aisles like chairs. Reporters hushed each other and checked that their recorders were on. My child stood a few feet away, staring at the floor as if the wood could change its story. I wanted to step closer and say a private mercy meant for no one else. I stayed where I was. Mercy given too soon becomes fuel. When the court reconvened, the judge addressed conflicts. He asked my child's lawyer to approach. He asked him to confirm prior employment at my firm. He asked about matters handled while employed. He asked whether those matters touched property or trust instruments that resemble the ones now in evidence. The lawyer answered carefully. The judge asked whether he had disclosed this to his client. The pause performed its own testimony. The judge did not accuse. He said the court expects counsel to avoid any appearance of divided loyalty. He said the court would accept a motion if counsel considered withdrawal appropriate. The room inhaled. My lawyer remained still. I remained still. This was not theater. This was gravity doing its work. The opposing counsel turned to my child and spoke in a voice too low for the microphones to love. I watched my child nod with a stiffness that reminded me of the day I taught a small body to stand after a fall. The lawyer faced the court. He asked to be heard on a motion. He said he would file to withdraw as counsel of record, effective upon the court's approval. The judge set a time. The judge warned about delay tactics. The judge made notes in that neat, lethal hand. My child blinked as if someone had snapped a light on in a dark room. He reached for a paper and picked up nothing. The expression that crossed his face was not rage. It was the hot shock of being left at the gate by the very hand that promised entry. The betrayal matched the one he had practiced on me, but this time it was measured in billable hours and public record. I stared at the water glass and saw my reflection move through it like a ghost that chose to stay. I had not spoken much. I had not needed to. The letter and deed had done the work I could not do without shredding what was left of love. The trust kept our roof from becoming a stage. The examiner's quiet lines had done what shouting never can. Truth had not won by force. Truth had stood and made space again. The judge adjourned for the day. People rose in a swell. Reporters surged toward the aisle. My child looked at me for the first time since morning and opened a mouth that had only held arguments for months. No sound came. I stood and gathered my folder. The bailiff cleared a path with the kind efficiency of someone who understands that dignity is part of order. At the threshold, I heard the clerk announce the motion to withdraw would be set for immediate hearing. A date, a time, ink met paper. The sound of it was cleaner than any speech. He thought he could finish. Me with a lawyer's voice and a crowd's cheer. Now his own lawyer was stepping away, leaving him with the echo. Reporters were already waiting on the steps when the doors opened that morning. I arrived early and stood just inside the corridor, watching lenses tilt toward whoever looked confident. My child came later, flanked by a junior associate who tried to fill the space left by the lawyer who had filed to withdraw. Photographers took pictures anyway. The crowd always prefers a face that looks like a headline. He did not look like a headline. He looked like a person standing in a coat that belonged to someone else. Inside, the judge's clerk called the motion. The former counsel confirmed withdrawal. The judge approved with a few clean words and set the next hearing for argument on sanctions tied to the altered spreadsheets. A murmur slid through the gallery. My child stared at the table, jaw tight, fingers pressed together as if holding a prayer he did not believe in. The junior associate asked for time to review. The judge granted less time than requested. Limits began to shape the room like walls rising around a story that had run wild. During recess, a microphone blocked my path. A reporter asked whether I wished to respond to claims that I had weaponized a trust to lock my child out of a future. I looked at the courthouse floor, old stone polished by years of feet, and said nothing. Silence traveled through the cameras like a cold hand. They moved to my child. He cleared his throat, lifted his chin, and gave the public the thing it always wants when a tide turns, a mea culpa polished for applause. He said the case had grown larger than he intended. He said he had been misled by advisors who sought conflict where conversation should have lived. He said he had acted out of fear. He said he would always love the person who raised him and that he hoped we could heal. He said all the words that keep doors ajar for future invitations. The crowd sighed in the way crowds do when they recognize a familiar script. Comments began to shift online. Some praised his courage to reassess. Others said he had only realized he would lose. Both were true in different rooms. I stood 3 steps behind the microphones and did not change my face. My lawyer touched my sleeve once, a small reminder to hold steady. He did not need to. I had no more speeches inside me. The letter in my folder could do what words could not. Back inside, the associate tried to reframe. He argued that any errors were clerical and that motive should not overshadow a child's pain. He quoted lines from the earlier testimony and asked the judge to weigh the human cost. My lawyer did not fight feeling with feeling. He took up the ledger again and walked the court through dates, seals, and the narrow band of facts that decide where property rests and who may move it. The judge listened with that same careful stillness. When he finally spoke, he returned to the examiner's findings. He asked directly who created the spreadsheets. The associate said a contractor. The judge asked for a name. The associate did not have one. The judge asked whether the plaintiff personally edited any data. My child swallowed. He said no. The judge asked him to confirm under oath. He hesitated for the first time in weeks, long enough for the room to hear the truth rise, and failed to clear his mouth. We broke for lunch. My child drifted toward me as if pulled by an old force. He stopped at a distance that once held a hug. He opened his mouth and closed it again. The sound of shoes on marble filled the gap. The junior associate returned with a phone held high, whispering something about optics and the kindness of a brief joint statement. I stepped away. Kindness has a time. This was not it. I ate alone on a bench in the courtyard, the kind of bench that remembers many long afternoons. A sparrow hopped near my shoe and stared as if I had crumbs to spare. I gave it none. Even small lives learn to search elsewhere when a hand is not for feeding. I thought about the year my child once called me every day for 1 week straight, asking for advice about a speech. I sat with that memory and let it breathe without reaching for it. Then I folded my napkin and went back in. The afternoon brought the slow unspooling that feels like gravity reclaiming whatever had been hung in the air too long. The judge set aside the request for control over assets. He noted the trust, the witness, the registry entries, the ledger from the lockbox. He said the court would consider penalties for the manipulated exhibits after a brief evidentiary session. He did not raise his voice when he said the word manipulated. He did not need to. The word did its own work. The associate attempted one last pivot. He asked the court to take into account a parent's admission of the slap. He tried to put the weight of that moment back at the center, to rebuild the case around a single act of contact. My lawyer stood and said the thing I had not known I needed to hear until that moment. He said impact matters, and my client admitted it, but a single wrong does not grant a child the keys to dissolve a home. He said the law does not turn shame into title. The room exhaled, slow and even. A motion to dismiss portions of the complaint was granted in part. The judge kept a narrow strip alive where testimony could still roam, then fenced the rest. The associate nodded as if he had expected worse. He probably had. My child stared at his hands as if they belonged to a pianist who had walked into a courtroom by mistake. When we adjourned, the steps outside filled again. My child moved to the microphones before anyone could call his name. He spoke clearly, the way a person speaks when a coach has edited every comma. He apologized for any confusion created by documents that did not meet standard. He praised the court. He praised the system. He praised the process that would let the truth unfold. He apologized to me by name in a sentence fine-tuned to land well on screens. The crowd softened. Forgiveness began to trend in comment sections where anger had lived. I did not step forward. I did not return the volley. Cameras turned toward me, then away, then back again, confused by a story with only one voice. Silence gathered around me like a shawl. It warmed and it weighed. It told the world that I would not help my child repair optics by lending my grief to his stage. I could forgive later at a table with no lights. Not here. By the time I reached the curb, the apology had been cut into clips with music layered beneath. A line about healing played under footage of us entering the building through different doors. A line about respect played under a still shot of me holding a folder. Strangers wrote that maybe this family could mend now. I kept walking. That night, calls I had not expected arrived. A cousin who had posted harsh slogans sent a voice note with a thick pause and a thin sorry. An old neighbor said she had known all along that I would keep my head. A former colleague offered to testify to the kind of ledgers I kept when we worked nights to meet deadlines no one thanked us for. I thanked them in a simple way and did not linger. Praise feels dangerous near verdicts. The next morning, the associate filed a notice that the plaintiff would seek settlement discussions. My lawyer read it without expression and asked me whether I wanted to hear terms. I said not yet. I said a person should never sit at a table still hot from the fire that burned them. He smiled a little and said he would delay without inflaming. He is good at that balance. In the afternoon, my child posted again. The apology widened. He called me a pillar and a guide. He used words I used to earn the hard way. He ended with a promise to do better. I recognized survival when I heard it. Survival dresses like virtue when it needs a ride home. He did not ask me directly for forgiveness. He asked the crowd to see him as a person learning. The crowd obliged. They often do. I walked to the market and bought onions, rice, and 2 lemons, the same way I used to do when money had to stretch. A woman by the stall asked if I was the parent from the case. I nodded. She said, "May God give you peace." I said, "And you." The exchange was small and honest. It steadied me more than any statement would have. Back at home, I took the letter from the folder and read the last lines again. Do not let sorrow make you weak. Do not let rage make you clumsy. Timing will be your shield. I placed the letter back and closed the drawer. I stood in the quiet kitchen and listened to the house breathe. Pipes clicked, the fridge hummed, the walls remembered. I understood then that victory in rooms like that courtroom does not feel like triumph. It feels like a tide finally setting down what it had lifted too high. The next hearing would settle the pieces the law can hold. It would not fix what broke in my child. It would not mend what broke in me. He had apologized to survive. I had kept still to survive. Survival does not heal. It only buys time for healing to choose us, if it ever does. When I left the courthouse at dusk, cameras waited again, softer now, less hungry. My child stood farther from the steps, phone in hand, face turned away. I looked at the sky, thin light cutting the clouds into ribbons, and stepped onto the sidewalk. A reporter called my name, ready to offer me a frame for the ending. I kept walking. I walked out of court victorious, but empty. It had been 6 months since the last gavel struck. The courthouse was quieter now. No cameras, no whispers, no headlines waiting to feed. Only the hum of old lights and the smell of paper that has seen too many names. I came alone, without a lawyer, without the folder that once felt like armor. I came to see the room where everything had broken and everything had been proven right, and to see if victory still meant anything when no one was left to share it. The benches were polished, the same way they always were. The window near the front still leaked a thin stripe of light that caught the dust midair. I sat. In the second row, the same seat I had taken on the first day of the trial. My reflection in the glass panel looked older than I remembered, softer in places where time had pressed too long. The trust still stood. The property was safe. The house was mine in law and in name. The documents that once carried fear now sat sealed in a drawer I rarely opened. But every night when I walked through those rooms, the air felt thinner. Each door I passed carried an echo, laughter that had left too soon, arguments that would never be finished. I had protected the home from being taken. I had not protected it from being hollowed out. My child left the city 2 months ago. The news reached me through someone else's mouth. There was talk of a new job, a new apartment, a new version of life. The apology stayed online, permanent, public, hollow. No letter, no visit. I did not expect one. Silence had become our shared language. We both spoke it fluently now. I remembered the last moment I saw him, standing outside the courthouse, face half turned toward traffic, avoiding mine. The cameras had left by then. Only real silence remained. He had wanted to speak. I could see it in the way his hands opened and closed. But pride is a heavy chain for a young soul. He carried it away like inheritance. I looked around the courtroom and realized how strange it is that justice has no warmth. When you win, it gives you papers. When you lose, it takes them away. Either way, you leave colder. I traced the edge of the bench with my fingers. The wood was smooth, worn by the same kind of waiting that had worn me. I thought of the years before the storm, the mornings when he was small enough to hold in one arm, the nights when the two of us built dreams out of exhaustion and tea. I had wanted him to have everything I never did. Instead, I had taught him how sharp everything can be when you want it too soon. Greed does not come all at once. It grows like mold, quietly, under warmth and comfort, feeding on what was meant to keep us safe. I used to blame the woman who whispered into his ear, the lawyer who promised him the world. But now I know the truth. She only found the crack. The weakness was already there, a seed I planted myself when I made sacrifice look too easy. I raised him to believe that hard work always leads to reward. I never taught him that sometimes it only leads to resentment from those who never worked beside you. I gave him strength, but not humility. Love without boundaries becomes debt. I learned that too late. The clock above the judge's chair ticked softly. Its rhythm matched the pulse in my hand. I thought of how silence had become my weapon in that room, how it had burned hotter than any argument, how every time I chose not to answer, it made him smaller, angrier, desperate to fill the void. People said I was strong. They said I won. But strength is a poor companion when it outlives its purpose. Winning is only peace for the world outside. It is not peace inside. Inside, you replay what could have been fixed before it turned into war. I closed my eyes and saw him at 10 years old, stubborn, brilliant, quick to laugh. I saw him at 17, slamming the door, saying I would never understand. I saw him in court, eyes full of reasons that did not belong to him. And I saw him now, somewhere far away, still carrying the shape of my love, twisted into ambition. I wanted to believe that he learned something. Maybe he did. Maybe one day he will understand that truth and love are not the same weapon. Truth cuts clean. Love cuts both ways. Outside the window, life went on, Taxis honking, people crossing streets, phones ringing. The world had already forgotten our story, but the silence inside me had not. It had grown roots, patient and deep. I lived carefully now, not out of fear, but respect for what silence can build and what it can destroy. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks of me when he sees houses with open windows and the glow of dinner tables behind glass. Maybe he remembers the smell of rice and lentils, the sound of an old fan clicking in the dark. Maybe he remembers that home was not walls. It was the person who kept the light on. The judge entered the room briefly, not the same one from our case, just another man in the same robe. He glanced at me, nodded politely, and moved on. He probably thought I was waiting for someone. In a way, I was. I was waiting for the version of myself that once believed justice would feel like peace. I stayed seated until the clock marked noon. The courtroom remained empty. Then I stood, my knees aching in that slow, truthful way they do now. I walked toward the door, each step sounding louder than it should. When I reached the threshold, I turned once, not to look back at victory, but to honor the price it came with. Revenge does not come with fire. It comes with quiet mornings where no one calls your name. It comes with dinner for one and the sound of your own spoon against the plate. It comes with knowing you were right, but wishing you had been wrong. As I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face, softer now, as if the world had forgiven something I still could not. I crossed the street and walked toward the park where my spouse and I used to sit after work. The bench was still there, worn smooth like the one in court. I sat down, pulled out the letter one last time, and read the final paragraph again. If you must choose between keeping what we built and keeping peace, keep the home. Peace can return. A home cannot be rebuilt once pride sets fire to it. The paper fluttered in the breeze, fragile but unbroken, much like me. I folded it carefully, slid it back into my pocket, and watched people passing by. Young faces, old ones, laughter, arguments, all of them carrying stories that would never see a courtroom. Maybe that was mercy. I thought of him again, not as the man who sued me, not as the stranger the world knew, but as the child who once fell asleep on my shoulder after crying over a broken toy. I wished him peace, even if it never found its way back to me. I whispered to no one. I taught him the cost of greed, but I paid the price of love. Then I stood and began to walk home. And if anyone reading this has ever been betrayed by someone they raised, remember this. Silence can be both shield and sentence. Use it wisely. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you raised, share this story. Sometimes silence is louder than any verdict.